Okay, so friends, this is our third lecture on population theories. In the first two lectures, I have discussed Malthusian theory of population and Marxist theory of population. In Marxist theory, last time I showed that Marx rejects Malthusian idea that there can be any natural law of population, and he says that basically the relationship between population and poverty or unemployment is not a relationship between two independent factors. Unemployed population or unemployment is only one part of the capital or one part of the labor. The unpaid part of the labor is represented by accumulated capital and the paid part by variable capital. So, it is a relationship between two components of the same labor, unpaid part and paid part. And according to law of capital accumulation, what he calls iron law of capitalist accumulation, as time progresses and as capitalist advancement takes place, proportion of variable capital keeps on declining, means that part of the capital which goes to workers in the form of wages, facilities and perks declines and fixed capital increases. Then I also talked a little bit about Hardin's idea and Ehrlich's idea of population bomb, which are in a way more supportive of Malthusian theory, and made a comment that ultimately when you look at population policies around, then policies of different countries are governed more by practical considerations rather than by theoretical considerations. In today's lecture, I will concentrate on demographic transition theory. Unlike the other two theories, Malthusian and Marxian, which are speculative theories, demographic transition theory is more of a factual kind, database, empirical, or in short factual. In sociology, you know the meaning of the term fact, social facts. Durkheim gave this concept of social fact. Durkheim would say that something like suicide as a concept would deal with definitions, where how is suicide defined, how does suicide get defined, that is the conceptual part, and the pattern relationships or patterns or regularities in ideas, beliefs, values, which can be discerned with the help of empirical data or facts. They are outside individual's consciousness. Looked at from that perspective, in demographic transition, birth and death rates are facts. They have a pattern. As according to Durkheim, suicide rate was a fact because for each culture there was a distinctive rate of suicide, and for different categories of population there were different suicide rates. Likewise, demographic transition is a fact because birth rates and death rates represent demographic situation of a country, a culture, a social structure, a society, and they are unrelated to individual choice. They are result of individual choices, but ultimately at the societal or macro level they emerge as facts. Now, demographic transition theory is one such attempt which explains changes in demographic regimes or changes in birth and death rates in response to processes of development and modernization. What happens to society? Is there a pattern? Can we say that a society which is in the primitive stage or undeveloped stage and is characterized by high birth and death rates, when it modernizes, when it develops, what happens to its demographic regime? That is the question that demographic transition theory attempts to answer. So, demographic transition theory is an attempt to capture the history of change in demographic condition. It is a process of change from a situation of high mortality and high fertility, this should be fertility, a process of change from a situation of high mortality and high fertility to a situation of low mortality and low fertility. Demographic transition theory is based on the history of Western, mainly Northwest European countries, and it relates demographic transition to economic development and industrialization. Now, let me use the board so that the transition becomes more clear. Demographic transition theory says that initially in pre-transitional stage, or you can call it primitive or ancient society, primitive society, a society in pre-transitional stage, or you may call it a primitive society, has high and fluctuating death rates. Death rate is number of deaths per year divided by average population for that year. So, number of deaths divided by average population. Why average? Because population is changing every day, every minute, every second. Population is changing, so it's some kind of average of population between 1st January and 31st of December, and number of deaths in a year. In primitive society, as we have seen when we were talking about world population growth, death rates were high and fluctuating. The long-term tendency of death was around 50 per thousand population. In ancient society or in primitive society or in less developed stage, death rate was around 50 per thousand. Life expectancy at that time was around 20. When we discussed demographic models, I said that in a theoretical case, life expectancy is 1 upon CDR. You see this kind of connection here. When life expectancy was around 20 and the population was stable with 0 rate of growth, then the death rate of population was around 50. But it was fluctuating. Sometimes it would rise to a level of 250 or 300 also. If there is an epidemic, if there is severe malaria, kala jar, smallpox, plague, or some such disease, or earthquakes or devastations or wars, then the death rate can rise to even 250. But then it also means that subsequently death rate can decline to a much lower level. So, there were fluctuations. As time passed, in stage 2, means in developing stage, or to use the term of demographic transition theory, transitional stage, you find that death rates, first the fluctuations are smoothed up, death rates remain high, but these fluctuations become less severe, and then death rates start declining. So, death rates are declining. And in the third stage or developed stage, this is stage 1, stage 2 stage 3, developed stage, death rates have come to a very low level. How low? It may be as low as 5 to 7 per thousand population. Sometime back, our death rates were high and fluctuating, and the crude death rate was around 50. Today, it is almost 1/10 of that, 5 to 7 per thousand population. And life expectancy at this stage is around 82 years. That in some of the developed countries like Japan or Sweden, life expectancy for women has gone up to 82 years. One major reason behind high crude death rate was high infant mortality rate, IMR. IMR was as high as 300, but today this IMR has declined to around 3 per thousand childbirths. When in country like Japan, when 1,000 children are born, only 2 or 3 of them die before celebrating their first birthday. All of them survive. So this happened to mortality. As society progressed from stage 1 to stage 2 and then stage 3, mortality started declining. During this time, as you have seen that for millions of years, the rate of growth of world population was almost 0 or very low. That means fertility, if I show fertility by dotted line, then fertility or crude birth rate was also around 50 per thousand. So that the growth rate of the population is 0. We call it ZPG, zero population growth. In stage 1, we had 0 population growth because mortality was high, fertility was also high, and perhaps along with mortality, fertility was also fluctuating. In those years in which mortality performance of population was much better. On long term basis, birth and death rates remained around 50, and we had 0 population growth. But as time passed and as society developed, mortality declined. For quite some time, fertility remained same, or fertility did not decline at the same pace at which mortality declined. So fertility remains high. And that means that the difference between fertility and mortality, which gives us the growth rate, that is increasing. We have increasing growth rate during the transitional period, and there is some time when this growth rate is maximum. After that point, fertility also starts declining, and eventually it's possible, as it has happened in some countries, that the level of fertility goes below the level of mortality, or at least they remain at the same level. They may fluctuate. Fertility may fluctuate, death rate may remain low or sometime increase a bit or decrease a bit, and the 0 population growth is again restored. So this second stage is the period of population explosion. And the third stage is again the stage of 0 population growth. This is what the theory of demographic transition says. Now, why does this happen? Why did this happen that death rates start declining and reach a low level like this? Can death rates improve further? Why does birth rate decline? What maximum value of growth rate is possible? These are all questions related to demographic transition theory. This, according to classical version of demographic transition theory, it explains reduction in death rate in terms of industrialization, economic development and urbanization. In a broad sense, that industrialization, economic development, urbanization lead to transition in death rate. Though many subsequent versions of demographic transition theory reject this idea of death rates responding to urbanization, industrialization and economic development. But in the classical form, it was said that death rates reduce because of this. You see, normally we think that death rates reduce in response to public health expansion or improvement in medical technology or health facilities, yes, or development of antibiotics or in general advancements in medical technology. That is there, but at least in the developed countries, in the countries of Northwest Europe, improvement in medicine was not the major factor. The major factors were related to economic development, to improvement in labor laws, political stability, improvement in public awareness, education, improvement in nutrition, and only subsequently in the last century, when mortality declined further, then development of antibiotics or improvements in surgical procedures, development of anesthesia and increasing role of public health became important factors, but initially they were not the important factors. It is easier to reduce death rate. Death rates, nobody wants to die, and all societies want to make an effort to reduce their death rate. There is not much opposition to improvement in scientific medicine, opening of hospitals, DDT spray. There has been some resistance somewhere, but by and large, irrespective of socio-economic status, religion, culture, all countries accepted all efforts on the part of state to reduce death rates. But state has limited capacity to influence birth rate. Birth rate decision regarding births is taken at the micro level, individual couples level, and unless couples are themselves convinced that it is in their interest to reduce family size, they will not do so. So, it takes time for birth rates to decline. Death rates can decline due to state efforts, macro level efforts, and due to general improvement in socio-economic conditions of society. But birth rates decline only when the individual couples perceive that reducing birth rate is in their interest. So, in short, this is what demographic transition theory says. To repeat, according to demographic transition theory, you can divide the history of demographic transition in a country into three parts. Stage 1, when death rate is fluctuating and high, it is at the level of around 50 per thousand and the life expectancy is 20. With development, economic development, industrialization, urbanization, death rates start declining and eventually they reach a low level, as low as say 5 to 7 per thousand. In this stage, life expectancy has already gone up to 82, and there is a possibility that life expectancy can improve further. Initially in stage 1, birth rates are also high and fluctuating. On long term basis, birth and death rates remain at the same level, so the growth of population is 0. And then after some time, when death rates have already declined, so decline in birth rate declines in response to two factors. In response to one, decline in death rate, and second, desire to limit family size for improvement in status. Though this is not very well understood phenomenon, why does birth rate decline? Why do couples limit family size? There may be several reasons behind, and reasons varied from country to country, but decline in death rate was supposed to be a necessary condition, not the sufficient condition, a necessary condition for decline in birth rate. And then general improvement in socio-economic condition, modernization, development and all. This is what demographic transition theory says. So, stage 1, in ancient society, survival of society required that it reproduces at the highest level to counter the high force of mortality caused by smallpox, plague, malaria, infectious diseases, wars, natural disasters, shortage of food, conflicts and wars. If a year was free from natural catastrophes, mortality was relatively lower, and if there were outbreaks of diseases, wars, fire, famine or abnormal rainfall, then mortality was high. In this stage, the rate of growth of population was around 0. In stage 2, society develops, death rate starts falling. Reasons are not adequately understood, but have to do more with economic development, urbanization and industrialization rather than expansion of public health facilities. Development of antibiotics and better surgical techniques has certainly played an important role in reduction of death rate, but mostly in the second part, of the transition in the last century, not in the first part. And this reduction in death rate, therefore, in absence of reduction in birth rate, led to population explosion. Stage 2 societies experience rapid population growth. Then finally, stage 3, there is equilibrium between birth and death rates again when couples start limiting number of children. In stage 3, when death rates are low and birth rates are also low, you have the condition of 0 population growth. So, this is a typical picture of demographic transition. With blue color, transition in birth rate is marked, red color transition in death rate is marked, and you see as society moves towards stage 2, then the population size starts increasing at a faster rate. Initially in this period, in stage 1, the size of population remains same, then the size of population starts growing at faster and faster rate, and in stage 3 and 4, in this picture we have shown a stage 4 also, which is a more advanced stage. In some books demographic transition stops here, but in some other books there is an attempt to do justice to experiences of developed countries in contemporary times. So, a 4th stage is shown, and by the time countries enter the 4th stage, when birth and death rates are extremely low and fluctuating, then population size has almost stabilized. Demographic transition has not followed the same course in all parts of the world. This is a very important point, and this also explains why you had population explosion and must talk of population explosion only in 1950s. If I show the difference between developed and developing countries, it is like this. In developed countries, you never had population explosion. The reason was that in developed countries, it took a very long period of time for death rates to decline. In a developed country, again the students of sociology can understand these things better. These developed, developing, these are all ideal types. Otherwise, when you go to specific countries, then experiences of specific countries may slightly differ from what we show here in the form of graphs and diagrams. In the developed countries, mortality started declining in 1750, and not exactly 1750, means sometime in the second or third part of 18th century. And death rates before transition also in the developed countries, death rates were relatively lower, maybe for environmental reasons or whatever, or developmental reasons. Death rates were slightly lower, fluctuating lower, and it took a very long period of time, to reach the level of death rate of contemporary developed countries. It took a very long period of time. Today, in 2010, it is, for now that I am saying that life expectancy of 82 years is reached from life expectancy of say 25 to 30. Developed countries had lower death rate and a high life expectancy than the case of developing countries has been. So, from 1750 to 2010, nearly 260 years, the major change in death rate took place in this 260 years time. Some demographers say that it took about 300 years, 3 centuries for death rates to decline from nearly 25 to 30 death rate to a death rate of 7 or 8. And during this time, their fertility had also started declining. Actually, in some countries like France, when we talk of demographic transition model, we are referring to situation in England. In France, both fertility and mortality declined at the same time. But in classical version of demographic transition, birth rate decline followed, and the gap between birth and death rate at any point of time never exceeded a figure like 0.6% per year, because it was a long term process. It took more than 2 centuries or even 3 centuries for death rates to decline. So, death rates declined at a slower pace, and in the meantime birth rate also started declining, and they never had the problem of population explosion. Anyway, less than 1/3 of the population of the world lived in developed countries, and when they started growing in 18th and 19th century, their growth rate was also never very significant, maximum 0.5, in some countries 0.4, some countries 0.5, 0.6. Rarely some country exceeded 1%. So, this was the situation in developed countries. In less developed countries like India or other developing countries of South Asia, Africa, what happened? The death rates were high and fluctuating, and the situation remained almost like this till the Second World War. Till 19, if I write year 1950 here, it will be arbitrary. We can't exactly say that till 1950 death rates were same and then suddenly, but this is indicative of a broad trend that there was not much decline in death rate in developing countries till the time of Second World War. After that, and maybe more, because the countries of Asia, Africa and Latin America became free around this time, and they had their own governments, they had advanced medical technology, DDT and all these things were already available. What they needed was simply to borrow money from developed countries or international organizations and use that for expansion of public health, and suddenly you find the death rate has declined. So, in this is in developed countries. In developing countries, there was a sudden decline in the death rate, but fertility remains same. There are some indications that in some countries, including in some parts of India, initially with modernization and economic development, fertility increased a bit. It is possible fertility can increase with modernization, but not much. And it took quite some time for birth rate to reduce. Even now, our birth rate is much higher than the death rate. Now, this explains why in 1960s the world population was exploding. First, nearly 2/3 of the world population lived in less developed countries or developing countries. Second, the transition was sudden. Suddenly after Second World War, death rates started declining. Birth rates did not decline. And this decline in death rate was independent of started declining. Hindu, Muslim, Christians, Africa, Asia, Latin America. The extent of decline differed, but in all countries there was a decline in death rate. Birth rates remained high. So, as a result of that, you find that many of the less developed countries during this time grew at a rate 3 to 4% per year, with a doubling time of 20 to 25 years. Very rapid growth of population. This is the cause of population explosion in the world. So, in 1960s you had explosion. This was the time when demographic transition was occurring in less developed countries, and due to sudden decrease in death rate and constancy or slight improvement in birth rate, there was a population explosion. So, this is what this slide explains, that in the developed countries it took a very long time in mortality and fertility to decline, and since the changes in both of them were slow, they did not experience, developed countries did not experience population explosion. In less developed countries the change was sudden. Now, it is easy for any state to work effectively towards reducing death rates. There is no religious or political opposition to DDT spray or vaccination or immunization program in the country. Yeah? It is not that if Congress party develops immunization program for children, then BJP opposes. No, nothing. Everybody supports reduction in death rate. But this is not the case with family planning. If those of you who read literature of that time and you know little bit about emergency period, when Congress party and especially under the leadership of Sanjay Gandhi was a very strong supporter of family planning program. So, when Congress party went for family planning in a big way, promoting sterilization, then it became a big political issue, and the next parliamentary election was fought on the issue of sterilization only, and the Congress party was defeated and Janata came. So, it is not easy for states to reduce fertility. Now, coming to causes of fertility decline, because this is the problem we are facing now. For fertility to decline, the couples must perceive a smaller family is a better family than a larger family. This perception is important. Individuals must recognize, couples must recognize that a smaller family is better than a larger family. Second thing, it is possible to decide how many children one should have. You may like to have a small family, but if you think that it is in the hands of God, that if God wants to give you a small number of children, you will have a small number of children. If God is sending more number of children, you will have more number of children. You can't do anything. People may not know that they can do something to limit family size. Then also fertility will remain high. So, this is second thing, that people must know that it is possible to decide how many children one should have. And then there are several methods of birth control that people are practicing, means norms. It must become a norm. People are practicing. I am not the only person to practice family planning. Couples must realize that we are not deviants. If we are trying to limit family size, if we are using contraceptive methods, we are not deviants. It has become a norm. And there is at least one birth control method which is easily available, affordable, safe, legitimate and acceptable. But what is safe, affordable, acceptable, this all depends on the culture. Now, from your perspective or my perspective, from the perspective of educated people in India or anywhere, easily available, affordable, safe, legitimate method must be condom. But you know that in a country like India, most of the family planners are using sterilization, that to female sterilization. If you look at statistics of family planning in India, most couples are using female sterilization as the method of as the method of birth control, which is not easily available. After all, it involves some small surgical operation, but it is affordable. As compared to condoms, it is not so easily available, so affordable, so safe, and but it is legitimate because we are a patriarchal society, and in patriarchal society we cannot take risk for men, we can take risk for women only. Even if there are perceptions, even if there are rumors that in some village somewhere after female sterilization 2 women died, no problem, but no man should become weak after sterilization. Man is so important, and as a result of that we have more of female sterilization than anything else. The couples accepting condoms is hardly 5%, and most people are using female sterilization. Our country, our family planning program, our NACO, National AIDS Control Program, they want that condoms should become more popular, and particularly in your age group, among adolescents and young adults, not only for the reason of family planning, but for preventing the spread of HIV/AIDS epidemic. And we must freely talk about that and motivate couples, motivate youths, young adults to use condoms. As far as evaluation of demographic transition theory is concerned, it has certain limitations also. First, it only summarizes the empirical experience of some industrially advanced countries, but does not present a coherent theoretical framework to establish relationship between development and demographic transition. It cannot be used for making predictions. Now, suppose we know demographic transition theory, can we predict how much more time Pakistan will take to reach below replacement fertility? We can't. And it completely ignores the role of migration. Demographic transition theory takes into consideration only birth rate and death rate. There are many countries, like countries of Middle East, which are greatly affected by the process of migration, international migration. It does not talk about international or national migration, and it does not explain it does not explain the time that a country will take to reach low levels of birth and death rates. In some country, in developed countries, they have taken 250 years or 300 years. In some countries in the less developed world, they are taking much less time, and it does not explain the causes of change in death and birth rate. The causes of change have not been same everywhere, and therefore there are various versions of demographic transition theory. Some give more importance to economic development, some to industrialization, some to social development. Social development means not economic development, not income, not improvement in per capita income, but improvement in education, health, and empowerment of women. So there are different versions of demographic transition theory, in the sense that they use different explanatory variables for explaining why transition. In some theories, more importance is given to economic development, mostly in explaining transition in Northwest Europe. Economic development and industrialization were given more importance. But when the transition was observed in less developed countries, there the social development, life expectancy, then education and westernization means values in place of economic development or social development. Some demographers give more importance to values than state policies. In many countries like China, state policies have played a more important role in reduction in birth rate. In our country also, family planning program and state policy has influenced changes in birth rates quite significantly. that ours was the first country in the world to launch an official family planning program in early 50s, and as a result of that, today more than 65% couples, married couples in India are using family planning methods, and maybe variety of other factors. Some people are also talking of second demographic transition, in which this refers to rapid fall in fertility to the below replacement level. Some of the developed countries, you see, the fertility has not only come to below replacement level 2.1, but average number of children in many countries has gone down to 1.2 or 1.3, which is a cause of worry for them and a cause of aging of population. So, whether India will also have second demographic transition, already some states like Kerala, Himachal Pradesh, Goa, some states in India have gone below the replacement level fertility. So, it is not zero population growth, it is potentially a negative rate of growth of population. Then there is third transition, some people use the term third transition for a situation in which after reaching below replacement fertility, some countries have shown some sign of improvement. As and when the developing countries will achieve the replacement or below replacement level fertility, this issue will become important for them also. So, in Kerala, the next question would be, is it possible for Kerala to have replacement level fertility? In the past, we were worried about high fertility. Now, the issue would be whether Kerala or Himachal Pradesh or Goa or Delhi would be able to maintain the replacement level fertility at least, or they will also suffer from negative growth rate of population. Now, connected with this demographic transition is the threshold hypothesis. Some demographers ask this question in the context of developing countries, whether development, economic development, social development, industrialization and urbanization will immediately produce results, or it will take some time for them to produce results in terms of reduction in birth and death rates. So, the threshold hypothesis suggested that some threshold level of socio-economic improvement is required, after which only further improvement in socio-economic conditions will lead to reduction in fertility, not before that. And Bernard Berelson, a famous demographer, used the following threshold level. For birth rates to reach a level of 30 per thousand, adult literacy must be around 70, school enrollment 55, life expectancy 60, infant mortality 65, and so on. And for birth rate of 20, the values of these indicators should be these. But this is debatable. Many countries have started reducing their birth rate to lower levels much before achieving these threshold level of values. There are no fixed indicators for the decline of mortality and fertility, but vital rates have fallen, mortality and fertility, in different circumstances, and broadly speaking, one may say that some minimum level of change in standard of living is required before people start thinking of planning family size, but it is not possible to fix any particular value of the indicators. And there is no agreement regarding which variables must be given top priority in applying threshold hypothesis, whether education or life expectancy or urbanization or infant mortality rate or what. The question is not easy to answer. Is it education, income, urbanization, age of marriage, women's empowerment, or what that determines beginning of demographic transition? Maybe you have some questions. We can take up one or two questions before I go to the next theory.
So, when we talk about demographic transition theory and see that the stage 2 shows population explosion, so is it good for a nation for like going through this stage? And if it is good,
demographic transition theory is a factual theory. It is not bothered whether growth of population is good or bad. It only says that in response to factors of economic development, industrialization and urbanization, death rates start falling, and so a period of high growth rate of population commences. Eventually, when birth rate has also declined, then we have a zero population growth again. But whether this growth of population is good or bad, generally the agreement is that growth of population in the developed countries, when they were passing through this transition stage 2, was good. Their population was small, density of population was small, they were industrializing at a fast rate and they needed labor. So, for economy of scale in their type of population, perhaps this growth of population was good, and this was a slow growth rate of population. In developing countries where economic resources were scarce, capital was scarce, already there was so much of poverty, unemployment and a colonial past, and then the growth rate of population was sudden, 3%, 4%. In our country we never had 3%, but in our country also we went up to 2 point something. Demographic transition is silent on whether this much of growth of population will be good or bad, and the issue whether in India or in less developed countries growth of population was good or bad has been a debatable question. Certainly in the short run, rapid growth of population is bad because it reduces your investment, savings, investment. You have to spend more on consumption, and therefore investment which is converted into a growth rate of national income by using some incremental capital output ratio, that is affected. But in the long run, when children born today enter the labor force after say age of 20 or so, it is possible to think of positive contribution of population growth also. You have more of human capital, and if you can give them skill, if you can provide them resources, equipment to work, then you can also reap the benefit of their contribution.
Sir, that theory, do you think it says that the transitional theory is based on the facts actually? Or do you think that it is not ignoring one of the important fact that all societies are not moving together? It's not necessary that all societies are moving from agriculture to industrial society, industrial to post-industrial society. So we cannot implement it in all society.
This is a drawback of this theory.
This is a drawback of this theory, that you cannot generalize on the basis of experience of northwestern European countries. Even in northwest Europe, different countries experience transition in different ways. Actually, this demographic transition theory does more justice to experience of England and Wales, not even to all northwestern European countries. France did not conform to this pattern, and in France decline in death rate and decline in birth rate were almost the simultaneous process. So, there was never any time when their population was growing at any high pace. Demographic transition theory assumes that first there will be reduction in death rate and then reduction in birth rate will follow. But in France, both of these things happened simultaneously. And so, obviously, different countries are following different models. Not all countries in the same region also have the same pattern.
And so, because these are natural processes, one cannot direct them in a particular channel or a direction. These death rates, birth rates, these are natural processes. So, obviously, demographic transitions would take place at different levels.
Here, the purpose of theorizing them sociologically is to say that they may be biological processes, but they are determined a lot by socio-economic, cultural and psychological factors.
Okay.
So, from that perspective, birth and death are biological phenomena, but for us, for sociologists, they are social facts. And we sociologists, at least in what is called the functional approach or systems approach, like to explain one fact in terms of other facts. So, we try to explain changes in birth and death rates in terms of education, economic development, and empowerment of women, urbanization and so on. This is what. So, finally, because there has been a debate and debate along theoretical lines, debate along it is not clear what factors explain transition. So, some people have suggested to your question whether growth is good or bad, that question can be answered better in terms of what we call optimum population theory. According to this optimum population theory, there are some basic assumptions of the theory that there are 5 factors of production: labor, capital, organization and enterprise. One single factor produces nothing. Cost of production falls with increasing use of one factor and increases thereafter. Perfect substitution of one factor by another is impossible, and optimum point arises when the ratio of marginal productivity of factor A to that of B is same as the ratio of price of factor A to that of B. This is the equilibrium condition in economics literature. This is the point at which equilibrium of various factors and population would be obtained, and population is a non-specific factor which can be put to alternative uses. Now, it is simple. What optimum population theory says, that if you draw a relationship between population and an indicator of development, whatever your indicator of development is, it may be say per capita income. Then initially, as population increases, your per capita income also increases. You can say that there are increasing returns in terms of income, there are increasing returns on population, and your per capita income is increasing. Population is increasing and per capita income is also increasing. We are benefiting from economy of scale. Population is increasing, per capita income is also increasing, and there is economy of scale. But beyond a certain limit, you see, this economy of scale is also observed in case of urban and rural areas. Why are large cities growing faster? Because there is economy of scale. Urban areas, metropolitan areas, Bangalore, Bombay, Delhi, these cities are growing faster than medium size or small towns because there is economy of scale. So, a certain amount of population is necessary, a desirable condition for growth of income. But beyond a certain level, further increase in population can lead to, and normally leads to, reduction in welfare or reduction in per capita income. Same thing you can talk about other indicators of development. So, according to optimum population theory, there is some size of population at which you derive maximum benefit in terms of per capita income or other indicators of development. This is optimum size of population, and beyond this, further increase in population is undesirable, because then further increase will lead to reduction in the welfare. Now, this theory has also been criticized. Gunnar Myrdal, the famous writer of Asian drama, Myrdal says that the optimum theory is associated with neo-Malthusianism and demand for a smaller population on policy grounds. Then Gottlieb states that it is impossible to compute an optimum. How do you compute? Is India's population optimum today, or it must rise a bit further, or we have already crossed optimum? How do you determine such questions? How do you determine such numbers, or how do you answer such questions? Then optimum population size depends on a variety of such factors as resources, level of technology, structure, of economy, model of ownership, means of production, class relations, international situation, and they change with time. Moreover, the optimum population size would depend on the criterion used for maximization of welfare. Suppose you say that on the basis of per capita income, this is the optimum size of population. On some other basis like infant mortality or life expectancy, there may be another optimum. So, that is another problem. And let me finish today by a quotation from Professor Mukherjee of Lucknow school. The true optimum of population is the integral optimum, which is based on a harmonious coordination of the optima in the successive levels of ecology, economy and state in respect of A, the expectation of life. So, he is identifying. Do you remember Radha Kamal Mukherjee of Lucknow? This is a quote from Radha Kamal Mukherjee. So, he is identifying various indicators in terms of which optimum must be established. The expectation of life, real income. Real income means income adjusted to changes in prices. If prices only are changing, if there is inflationary trend, then a small increment in income can be due to that or is neutralized by change in prices. Real income, personal happiness and self expression, all these from the individual standpoint and of the stability of economic base and occupational balance, the regularity and continuity of employment, and C, national security in power, all of the latter from the collective standpoint. So, a few things from individual standpoint and a few things from collective standpoint. Radha Kamal Mukherjee has made discussion of optimum population much more difficult by introducing the concept of individual standpoint, collective standpoint and various dimensions of development, life expectancy, income, happiness. How do you measure happiness? Self expression. How do you measure self expression? And at the macro level, economic base, occupational balance, what is occupational balance, and national security and power. Mukherjee said that this optima was, however, only a hypothesis, though of a great analytical value and cannot be quantitatively measured or expressed. I think we stop here today. If there is any more question, we can take up one question. Okay, so we stop. Thank you.